The mansion had always been a place of quiet luxury. Polished marble floors, imported sculptures, and hallways wide enough to swallow echoes. But that afternoon, the silence felt dangerous. As the storm clouds gathered over the sprawling estate, a 12-year-old girl named Amara lingered near the mezzanine balcony, clutching her backpack after school. She had come to wait for her mother, the housekeeper, just as she did every weekday. Only this time, she witnessed something she was never meant to see. Below her, in the grand study lined with leather-bound books, two sharply dressed executives moved with hurried precision. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't behave like guests. They behaved like thieves who knew exactly what they were doing. One of them opened a Billionaire's signature blue portfolio, the one Amara had often seen her mother dust with nervous or respect, while the other slid in a thick manila folder. The switch was clean, fast, and practiced. Amara watched frozen, barely breathing. She knew the blue portfolio contained something important. Everyone in the mansion knew. It held the final contract for a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic initiative that their boss, Darius Kingsley, was preparing to sign the next morning. It would change millions of lives. It would shape schools, shelters, and community centers across the country. And these executives were replacing it with something else. Something they didn't want Darius to see. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to hear them whisper, "He'll never notice." But she had. Amara slipped back into the shadows, her heart thudding, her mind racing. She was a housekeeper's daughter, meant to stay invisible, unheard, unnoticed in a world that didn't belong to her. But now she held a truth that could destroy everything. A truth that someone, somewhere, would want her silence for. And when she finally gathered every ounce of courage she possessed and whispered to her mother later that evening, "Mama," I saw them switch the folder. She began a chain reaction that would expose betrayal at the highest level, topple careers built on deceit, and alter the fate of a billionaire who had unknowingly put his trust in the wrong people. Darius Kingsley had never forgotten where he came from. Long before he became one of the wealthiest philanthropists in the country, long before Forbes listed him as a billionaire with a conscience, he was just a boy from a crumbling apartment block where broken elevators and broken dreams went hand in hand. His mother worked 2 minimum-wage jobs, and every night she would whisper to him that their circumstances didn't define them. Those whispers turned into ambition, and that ambition turned into an empire that spanned tech, real estate, and educational initiatives. By the time he turned 48, he had the money, the power, and the recognition, but none of it mattered to him more than the massive project he had spent years constructing. The Horizon Promise Initiative, a program designed to rebuild struggling schools in marginalized neighborhoods, fund youth mentorships, and provide housing support for families living on the edge of homelessness. It wasn't just another donation. It was a legacy he hoped would rewrite everything he had lived through. The final contract, worth over $3.2 billion, was scheduled to be signed the next morning at a press conference expected to draw national attention. Lawyers, executives, representatives from dozens of cities, and board members had spent months preparing for it. And all the official documents were kept inside the blue leather portfolio that never left his personal study. The same portfolio Amara saw tampered with. Amara had grown up in the hallways of the Kingsley estate, while her mother, Lila, scrubbed marble floors and polished silverware that cost more than her monthly rent. Amara wanted the quiet spaces after school. She was respectful, always, but curious, always drawn to the vastness of the mansion and the quiet pockets of warmth hidden within it. Darius himself was often kind to her, offering a smile or a gentle wave when passing by. He was the type of man who remembered names, even when they belonged to people society ignored. But kindness didn't erase power, and power didn't erase hierarchy. Amara knew she was only tolerated because her mother was trustworthy. Lila had worked for Darius for almost 5 years and had proven herself loyal, diligent, and quiet. She kept her head down, stayed out of lead affairs, and taught her daughter the same. People like us, she often told Amara, must observe without being seen. Yet the truth refused to stay quiet that day. When Amara came running to her mother in the staff's kitchen lounge, face pale, breath shallow, Lila's first instinct was to protect her job, not expose someone else. She pulled her daughter into a corner, asking what she saw, repeating the question until every detail spilled out trembling and raw. 2 executives, a blue portfolio, a manila folder, a whispered comment. He'll never notice. Lila felt her stomach twist into knots. She knew those men, Evan Cross and Martin Blair, 2 high-ranking leaders within Kingsley Global. Both had reputations that sparked whispers in the staff corridors. Ambitious, arrogant, entitled men who shook hands only to calculate how much the other person could offer them. Men who brushed past housekeepers as if they were furniture. They were part of the board overseeing the Horizon Promise initiative. And they had everything to lose if Darius's philanthropic contract went through, because the initiative would reduce internal profit margins and shift control away from the executives who had grown wealthy under the company's old systems. If Amara was telling the truth, then the switch she witnessed wasn't just deceit, it was a sabotage, a betrayal crafted from greed, wrapped in strategy, executed with surgical precision, a move meant to derail the entire initiative without Darius realizing who was responsible. Lila's hands trembled as she held her daughter close. "If this is true," she whispered, "we are in danger for knowing it." Amara didn't fully grasp the weight of that sentence. She only knew what she had seen and that it felt wrong, deeply wrong. That evening, as the mansion's lights shimmered against the storm clouds, Lila paced a tiny bedroom in the staff quarters, barely large enough for a single bed, wondering what the right thing was. Tell no one and protect her job? Or risk everything by telling a billionaire something that could get her fired, or worse. Amara's wide eyes followed her mother's frantic steps. "You always say to do what's right," the girl murmured softly. The words pierced Lila straight through the heart. It wasn't easy teaching principles in a world that punished the powerless for having any, but she had always tried. And now those lessons echoed back at her, small and fragile, but true. She knew what she needed to do. Even if her voice shook, even if her hands wouldn't stop trembling, even if tomorrow looked different because of it. When the morning sun rose behind gray skies, Lila made a decision that would fracture the facade of loyalty surrounding Darius Kingsley. She would take her daughter's truth straight to the billionaire himself, and the fallout would shake the entire empire. The next morning began with a heaviness that clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Lila hardly slept. She had spent most of the night thinking about consequences, one she could predict, and those she feared more because she couldn't. In the world she lived in, honesty didn't always offer protection. Sometimes it invited danger, but she kept replaying her daughter's trembling voice, her insistence that she'd seen something wrong. And despite every warning from her survival instincts, Lila couldn't shake the conviction that staying silent would be worse. Darius Kingsley was scheduled to leave for a TV interview at 10 a.m., then head straight to the monumental contract signing at noon. By 8 a.m., the mansion was already buzzing with executives, assistants, chauffeurs, and media staff preparing for the day's whirlwind. The blue portfolio, now contaminated with treachery, rested on the glass table in the study, waiting to be carried out like any other document. Amara watched all of this with an anxious knot in her stomach, sitting quietly on a bench normally reserved for guests. She wasn't supposed to be there, but Lila kept her close, unwilling to let her out of sight after what she witnessed. Finally, as the morning commotion peaked, Lila approached the hallway outside the study, her palms damp, her heartbeat almost painful. She waited for the moment when Darius stepped away from the circle of executives and assistants orbiting him. In a rare stroke of luck, or fate, he paused near the doorway, flipping through a briefing document. This was the moment. Lila swallowed hard, stepped forward, and spoke his name with a voice that felt too small in the massive room. "Mr. Kingsley, there's something important you need to know." He turned at the sound, slightly surprised. Housekeepers rarely address him directly unless spoken to first. His eyes softened with familiar politeness, but beneath the surface lay a sharpness, a businessman's instinct to measure the intentions of anyone approaching him unexpectedly. "Yes, Lila? Is everything all right?" Lila wished she could nod and back away, but she remembered Amara's terrified expression, and the fear shifted into resolve. "My daughter," she said slowly, "saw something yesterday, something that concerns your blue portfolio." The softness in Darius's expression vanished. A stillness replaced it, quiet, alert, probing. He set the briefing file down. What exactly did she see? Lila hesitated. She couldn't bring herself to repeat the words. Instead, she gently pushed Amara forward. The girl's voice was barely above a whisper, but the truth carried a weight that filled the space. I saw them switch your folder. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that tightens around the lungs. Darius's brows furrowed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply crouched slightly to Amara's level, absorbing every tremor in her small body, every detail she shared. Her innocence made her account even more undeniable. She had no reason to invent a lie, no benefit in fiction, no understanding of corporate betrayal. When she finished, Darius stood slowly, the wheels in his mind turning with dangerous precision. Evan Cross, Martin Blair, two men he already suspected of pushing back against the Horizon Promise initiative behind closed doors. If what Amara witnessed was true, it meant they were prepared to destroy the project from the inside. It meant they were willing to sabotage the lives of millions just to protect their own profit margins and control. He thanked Amara gently, then dismissed her with a soft reassurance. But the moment she walked away, he called for internal security. Not just any guards, his personal team. The estate transformed instantly. Security members swept the study, reviewing camera footage, cross-referencing time logs, and scanning every corner of the room. It didn't take long to find evidence. A tiny gap in the usually seamless shelves, indicating the safe had been opened. Keypad data confirmed 2 unauthorized access attempts. Fingerprint analysis narrowed the suspects to exactly who Amara had named. Darius's calm exterior masked a fury that had been simmering beneath layers of leadership. He had trusted these men. He had let them into a circle most never entered. They had smiled at him in board meetings, patted his back during charity galas, and pitched themselves as dedicated allies to his mission, all while plotting to sabotage it. The thought made his jaw clench. But fury alone wasn't enough. He needed proof. Real proof. Something that couldn't be twisted by lawyers or painted over by corporate PR. He opened the Switch portfolio. Inside the manila folder were pages that had nothing to do with the Horizon Promise initiative. They were filled with alternative project outlines, redirections of funds, structural revisions that would quietly gut the philanthropic program from the inside. Worse, several documents bore forged signatures, his own, attached to revisions he had never approved. The betrayal wasn't subtle. It was total. He closed the folder with deliberate care, then ordered his head of security to locate Evan Cross and Martin Blair. But the men were already in the mansion, already dressed for the press conference, already standing at the foot of the staircase, whispering to each other in the nervous tones of those who knew the clock was ticking but believed they were still in control. Darius didn't approach them directly. He didn't create a scene. He simply informed the media team that the schedule was shifting. He instructed his assistant to delay the convoy. Then he summoned the 2 men to the study with a calmly worded request. What they didn't know was that every word spoken inside that room would be recorded, every reaction filmed, every lie documented. They walked into the study with arrogance. They walked out pale. Inside, confronted with evidence, confronted with security footage, confronted with their own fingerprints on the safe, the facade began to crack. They scrambled for excuses, blaming interns, administrative mix-ups, broken procedures. But Darius had seen betrayal before in his rise to power. Lies had a cadence he recognized well. He didn't need them to confess. He already had everything. Still, he listened, expression unreadable, as they unraveled. Little did they know the truth was already out, a truth delivered by a little girl who had no power except the courage to speak. But the rising action did not end here, because betrayal at this level never collapses quietly. And Evan and Martin, realizing the magnitude of the disaster they were facing, began plotting a desperate move before their empire crumbled, a move that would put Amara and her mother in more danger than they ever anticipated. The story was far from over. The mansion no longer felt like a place of polished calm. It vibrated with tension, with the tight air of men cornered by their own greed. While Darius's private security team escorted Evan Cross and Martin Blair out of the study to await further instructions, neither man walked with the confidence they once possessed. Their faces were tense, their movements jerky. They whispered harshly to each other as they were led to a waiting room near the West Wing. But fear didn't make them quiet. Fear made them dangerous. They had spent years climbing the corporate ladder with sharp elbows and sharper intentions. They had built alliances on backroom promises and threats whispered through smiles. Men like them didn't surrender. They recalculated. They adapted. And when cornered, they lashed out. Within minutes, they understood the situation. They were being held in the mansion. They had been exposed without warning. Their attempt to sabotage the contract had been discovered before it even left the estate. And someone must have tipped Darius off. Someone who wasn't supposed to be watching. Someone small enough, invisible enough, to be overlooked. Amara. Evan's jaw tightened. Martin's fist clenched around the arm of his chair. It didn't take them long to realize the truth. Security footage had been thorough, but not thorough enough to catch what the men were thinking. Amara had been in the mansion the day before. She often was. Her mother worked there. She must have seen something. And if Darius believed her enough to halt the entire signing process, it meant her testimony was dangerous. In their twisted minds, the logic was simple. If the witness disappeared or recanted, the evidence would look weaker. Accusations could be reduced to misunderstandings. Lawyers could spin narratives. Wealth could buy silence. So the men waited until the security guards, underestimating them, stepped outside the door for a moment. In that sliver of time, they slipped from the room like shadows. The mansion was enormous, full of servants, staff passageways, and blind spots. Evan had been in the house countless times. Martin knew every corner of the ground floor. They moved fast, and they went looking for the one person who could ruin them. Amara was with her mother in a side hallway near the kitchens when Lila sensed something wrong. It wasn't a sound or a word, just a shift in the air, that quiet intuition mothers possess when danger circled their children. She pulled Amara closer, her eyes darting down the corridor. That was when she saw them. Two silhouettes at the far end, walking too quietly to be innocent. Two men with hardened expressions, eyes scanning every corner like hunters searching for prey. Evan Cross, Martin Blair. The color drained from her face. She didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed Amara's hand and pulled her toward the nearest door, a laundry room tucked away behind the staff pantry. They slipped inside, closing the door as silently as possible. But just as the latch clicked, footsteps approached. Slow, heavy, intentional. Amara trembled in her mother's arms, trying to stay silent, trying to keep her breath from giving them away. She didn't understand the full extent of the danger. She only knew the men looked angry, angrier than people who knew they were caught should have looked. Lila held her close, one hand over her daughter's mouth, her own fear radiating through her bones. Outside the door, the footsteps stopped. Then came the sound of a slow exhale, a cold, mocking whisper from Evan. She had to be around here. Little rats always hide. Lila felt her chest tighten painfully. She pressed Amara tighter against her. They weren't just looking for them. They were hunting. On the other side of the mansion, Darius was meeting with security, preparing the documentation that would expose the executives publicly. He assumed the men were being held securely, unaware of the breach. And while the mansion was equipped with dozens of security cameras, not all hallways were covered, especially those built decades ago for staff access. This was one of those blind hallways. Lila knew no one would find them in time if things escalated. Outside, Martin's low voice joined Evan's. Check the rooms. She can't be far. And the mother won't leave her alone. Their footsteps split. One man moving left, the other right. Lila knew hiding wouldn't last. She needed to move. She waited until the footsteps faded down opposite ends of the hall, then took Amara's hand again, whispering with trembling lips, "We run. Stay behind me. Don't make a sound." Amara nodded bravely. Together, they slipped out of the laundry room and moved quietly toward the service stairwell that led to the mansion's east wing, where security was likely stationed. But halfway down the hall, a voice called out behind them. Going somewhere? Evan. He stood blocking the corridor, his expression twisted with rage and desperation. Martin appeared behind them moments later, closing them in. Amara froze. Lila stepped in front of her. "If you think a kid will take us down," Evan growled, "you don't know how this game works." Lila shook, but her voice barely held steady. "You need to leave. Security is—" "Security won't get here in time," Martin snapped. Evan took a step forward, but before he could take another, a sound broke through the tension. A sharp voice behind him. Actually, it said, "They already did." Darius. He stood at the end of the hallway, flanked by two armed security officers. His expression was cold, controlled, but his eyes burned with fury that froze both executives mid-step. "Step away from them," he commanded. Evan swallowed. Martin raised his hands instinctively, but it was too late. Security descended, slamming them against the wall, cuffing their wrists, and dragging them away as they shouted weak denials that dissolved into desperate threats. But Darius didn't look at them. He looked at Lila and Amara, the two who stood trembling in the corridor, one out of fear, one out of bravery she didn't yet understand. He approached them slowly, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. In that moment, the climax wasn't just a capture of two corrupt men. It was a realization of how fragile justice was, how easily it could fall apart, how much depended on the courage of those who had the least power, and how one child's truth had saved $1 billion promise from being destroyed. Security escorted Evan Cross and Martin Blair off the property within minutes, but the echoes of their footsteps lingered long after they were gone. For Darius Kingsley, the hallway where he found Amara and Lila became a symbol, one he would never forget. Betrayal had nearly destroyed a legacy that had taken him his entire life to build. And yet, salvation had come from the very place most people in power overlooked, a housekeeper and her young daughter. The storm outside had finally broken, rain streaking the windows in soft lines, washing the tension-covered walls as if cleansing the state of deceit that had thrived within it. Inside, Darius led Lila and Amara into his private study, once the site of crime, now a place of truth. He motioned for them to sit, though Lila hesitated, feeling too small for the space. "Please," he said gently, "you're safe here." For the first time all morning, Lila allowed herself to breathe. The blue leather portfolio sat on Darius's desk, untouched since the moment he discovered the fraud inside it. The manila folder, the symbol of greed, had been sealed away in an evidence bag. Lawyers were already being alerted, news statements drafted, authorities contacted. But he wasn't thinking about that right now. He was thinking about Amara, a child, just 12 years old. The only reason his life's work hadn't been destroyed. He knelt beside her gently, a gesture that broke every barrier of hierarchy. "You were very brave," he said, his voice low, steady. "You told the truth even when it was dangerous. That's something most adults struggle to do." Amara didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, overwhelmed by the emotion of everything that had happened. Lila's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from the relief that washed over her, relief that her child had survived, that they had been believed, that their voices mattered. Darius stood again, the weight of responsibility settling over him in a new way. He turned to Lila. "You protected her," he said, "and you came to me with the truth. I owe you more than gratitude." Lila shook her head quickly. "You don't owe us anything. We just did what was right." "Yes," he replied softly, "and that is everything." The fallout that followed would become one of the most significant scandals in Kingsley Global's history. Evan Cross and Martin Blair were arrested the same day. Charges of fraud, document forgery, attempted sabotage, and endangerment stacked against them like bricks forming their own prison. The media pounced immediately, broadcasting images of two powerful executives being let out in handcuffs, faces twisted with the realization that their empire had crumbled in the span of a few hours. Darius didn't hide the truth. He stood before reporters the next morning and spoke openly about the attempted sabotage. He didn't mention Amara or Lila by name. He refused to put them in the spotlight, but he made one statement that resonated across the country. "Real integrity," he said, "is often found in the people society overlooks. Today, this initiative was saved because someone without power chose to speak up." His words rippled across homes, headlines, and social feeds nationwide. The Horizon Promise initiative moved forward with more support than ever. The public rallied behind it, shocked by the attempted sabotage, but inspired by the bravery that exposed it. Donations increased. Partnerships expanded. Communities lifted their voices in support. The program's core message, lifting the overlooked, suddenly felt even more profound. But behind the scenes, Darius knew one thing. The very people the initiative was meant to help had already proven to be its strongest protectors. For Lila and Amara, life changed quietly at first. Instead of returning to their normal routine the next day, Darius invited them to his office. Not as staff, but as honored guests. He insisted they sit comfortably as he spoke, with sincerity that made Lila's breath tremble. "You've given me something priceless," he said. "Not just a protection of this initiative, but a reminder of why I started it." He turned to Amara with a warm, contemplative smile. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Amara blinked, unsure. She'd never been asked by someone like him, someone who could make futures shift with a single decision. I don't know," she said softly. "That's all right," Darius replied. "But whatever it is, I want to help you get there." He presented her with something she didn't expect. An educational scholarship that guaranteed her access to the best schools, mentorship programs, and a pathway to college fully funded. Lila gasped, covering her mouth with shaking hands. "No, sir, we can't accept something like that." "You can," he said firmly, "and you will. This isn't charity. It's recognition." His voice softened. She saw injustice and refused to let it pass. Those are the people who deserve every opportunity. Lila's tears fell freely now. Amara's eyes widened, not fully understanding the magnitude of what she'd been given, but feeling the warmth of hope blooming in her chest. As they left his office, the sun broke through the clouds outside, illuminating the mansion in a golden glow. A sign, perhaps, that the storm had passed. Over the following weeks, life settled, but something in Amara shifted forever. She walked with a little more confidence. She held her head higher. She understood, deep in her heart, that her voice could change something bigger than she ever imagined. Lila found her own sense of pride growing quietly beside her daughters. She had protected her family and helped protect the integrity of a program meant to uplift others. And though she still cleaned rooms and polished silverware, she did so with a light inside her that had not existed before. As for Darius, the mansion felt different now. Every time he passed a study, he remembered how close everything came to collapsing, and how a 12-year-old child stopped it all. He made a promise to himself that day, a silent vow that no voice, no matter how small, would ever be dismissed in his presence again. Because sometimes the greatest truths did not come from boardrooms or billionaires. They came from the unseen corners, from the overlooked hallways, from a little girl who simply refused to stay silent. And with that, the Horizon Promise Initiative launched successfully, reaching millions across the country. Schools were rebuilt, families received support, shelters expanded, communities transformed, all because one child chose to tell the truth. Her courage became woven into the story of the initiative, even if the world never knew her name. And somewhere inside her heart, Amara carried the secret knowledge that she had helped protect something enormous, something life-changing, something that mattered. The world would never see her as the hero behind the scenes, but the billionaire whose legacy she saved always would. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Legacy.